The United States gains overseas territories is Chapter 21, Section 1. Today you will learn to explain why some people favored expansion over isolation, describe the events that led to the U.S. annexation of Hawaii, identify the goals of U.S. foreign policy in Japan and China. Okay guys, the first thing I want you to do is make a chart. Label one side of the chart inside facilities, on the other side outside facilities. Then I want you to come up with a list of all the activities that go on in certain areas inside the school. Then I want you to think of the other activities that go on outside of the school. Now that you've done that, I want you to think what it would be like if some other classrooms began claiming the outside items, such as the baseball field, as their own and did not allow other classes to use them. In this section, you will learn that the United States was faced with a similar problem as other countries divided up the world into colonies and attempted to control colonial trade. On March 16, 1889, 1 British, 3 German, and 3 U.S. warships prepared to fight for control of Samoa. Before any fighting could begin, however, a sudden storm blew in and destroyed all the ships except the British vessel. The storm prevented a battle that day, but it did not end Western countries' race to expand around the world. Europeans were willing to risk war in such a far-off place as Samoa because they wanted to build naval bases and protect shipping routes in the Pacific. This was part of imperialism. Several forces drove imperialism. Countries wanted copper, rubber, and tin to help industrial growth. Some saw taking over colonies as a source of power and national pride. William H. Seward arranged purchase of Alaska from Russia. We bought, the United States that is, Russia for $7.2 million. That is less than 2 cents an acre. That addition added 600,000 square miles to the U.S., and it also had valuable resources, such as furs, minerals, and timber. The United States did not begin expanding overseas until the late 1800s. Previously, Americans had followed a policy of isolationism, avoiding involvement in the affairs of other countries. Long before, President George Washington had warned Americans to steer clear of the permanent alliances with other countries, particularly those in Europe. U.S. leaders had tried to follow his advice by staying out of overseas conflicts. Another Pacific island nation, Hawaii, also interested imperial powers. The Hawaiian Islands had a tropical climate and fertile soil. The Hawaiian people had first contact with Europeans in 1778 when British explorer Captain James Cook arrived. Trading and whaling ships in the Pacific then began stopping in Hawaii for supplies. Later, American missionaries came to convert the Hawaiians to Christianity. These missionaries opened business and raised crops, such as sugarcane. Some missionary families became rich sugar planters. By the 1840s, most shops and shipyards in Hawaii were owned by Americans. Sugar had become a leading export of the Hawaiian economy. In 1875, treaty allowed Hawaiian sugar to be shipped duty-free to the United States. In return, Hawaii agreed not to give territory or special privileges to any other country. Hawaiian sugar production boomed, and the power of the planters grew. Please continue to copy and paste the link to learn more about Hawaii. By the mid-1800s, some European powers had formed strong trade ties with much of East Asia, but the island nation of Japan had isolated itself from the rest of the world for hundreds of years. Japan's leaders had also banned travel to other countries. The United States wanted to open Japan's trade before Europeans got there. President Millard Fillmore sent Commander Matthew Perry to secure friendship commerce, a supply of coal and provisions. On July 8th of 1853, a crowd of astonished Japanese watched a fleet of 4 U.S. warships enter Edo, known now as Tokyo Harbor. Perry delivered a letter to the Japanese government from President Fillmore, suggesting peaceful trade ties. Perry returned to Japan in February of 1854 with 7 warships. He brought gifts showing some of the benefits the United States could offer. This effort and the presence of American military power persuaded Japanese leaders to sign a treaty opening trade with the United States. In 1856, Townsend Harris arrived in Japan as the first U.S. general, or chief diplomat. Despite some opposition in Japan, he negotiated a trade treaty in 1858. Japanese leaders believed their country needed to industrialize wanted trade with the United States. In 1868, those favoring industrialization came to power in Japan, becoming a time of modernization known as Meiji Restoration. During the next 40 years, Japanese leaders invested heavily in industry and in making the country's military stronger. The government sent Japanese students to Western schools to study science, technology, and Western government. One such student explained his goal. The final purpose of all my work was to create in Japan a civilized nation as well equipped in the arts of war and peace as those to the Western world. By the 1890s, Japan was becoming a major imperial power. Japan invaded China in 1894. After defeating China's military, Japan gained the same trade privileges in China as European countries enjoyed. In addition to winning the new territory, in 1904, Japan and Russia went to war. President Theodore Roosevelt helped negotiate a peace treaty to end the war a year later. The Japanese had won the respect they desired. Japan gained Korea, a lease on Port Arthur in China, and other rights. In just 50 years, Japan had changed from an isolated, non-industrial country to a major world power. Hillary Herbert, U.S. Secretary of the Navy, said, "Japan has leaped almost one bound to a place among the greatest nations of the earth." Economic interest drew in the United States not only to Hawaii and Japan, but also to China. The United States and many European nations engaged in profitable trade. After Japan defeated China in 1895, other countries quickly took further advantage of China's weakness. They decided to create spheres of influence, which basically mean they took control over trade routes that allowed people to trade from China to other countries. The United States was worried that they were not going to have any trade markets in the area, so U.S. Secretary of State John Hay announced the open door policy. Hay sent a series of notes to Japan and some European countries in 1899. The main argument of the open door policy was that all nations should have the equal access to trade in China. When the European powers in Japan neither accepted nor rejected, Hay announced that it had been accepted. China was upset at this. They decided to have the Boxer Rebellion. The Boxers were Chinese nationalists who were members of a group called the Fist of Righteous Harmony. The Boxers decided to create a rebellion. For 2 months, the siege continued as military forces that included U.S. Marines fought their way from the port of Beijing. The Boxers were soon defeated, and China was forced to accept a harsh settlement. The Chinese had to pay $333 million cash payments to foreign governments, $25 million of which went to the United States. Secretary of State Hay then sent another open-door note to Japan and the European nations. He restated U.S. position that all nations should have equal access to Chinese markets. Hay wanted to prevent any European colonization of China that would limit U.S. influence. The open-door policy remained in effect long after the Boxer Rebellion.